The Austro-Prussian War began on June 15, 1866. It ended on August 23 of the same year. Between these dates, the political structure of Central Europe changed permanently. What had taken centuries to build collapsed in 7 weeks. For 300 years, the Habsburg monarchy in Vienna had guided the German-speaking world. Austria held the presidency of the German Confederation, a loose alliance of 39 states. This position granted Austria influence over territories from the Rhine to the borders of the Russian Empire. But influence is not the same as control, and by the middle of the 19th century, Prussia had grown strong enough to challenge Vienna's leadership. The immediate cause of the war concerned the duchies of Schleswig and Holstein. These territories had been jointly administered by Austria and Prussia since 1864, following a brief war against Denmark. The arrangement was unstable. Both powers wanted exclusive control. Diplomatic efforts failed. Otto von Bismarck, Prussia's minister-president, saw an opportunity. He had already secured neutrality from France and an alliance with Italy. Austria would face enemies on 2 fronts. When fighting began, most observers expected Austria to prevail. The Habsburg Empire was larger, wealthier, and commanded respect across Europe. Its army had a distinguished history, but size and tradition do not guarantee victory. Wars are decided by preparation, technology, and the speed with which commanders adapt to changing circumstances. Prussia mobilized faster than anyone anticipated. The kingdom had invested heavily in railway infrastructure during the preceding decade. 5 separate rail lines carried troops and supplies toward the border with Austria. Each line had been planned with military requirements in mind. Stations were positioned to facilitate troop movements. Sidings allowed trains to pass each other without delay. Rolling stock had been accumulated in sufficient quantities to move entire divisions at once. Within days, Prussian forces assembled in positions that would have taken weeks to reach by traditional methods. The railways compressed time itself. This speed gave Prussia an advantage before a single shot was fired. Austria's mobilization was slower. The empire's railway network was less developed, particularly in the northern regions where the main fighting would occur. Austrian commanders relied on older logistical methods. Their armies moved at the pace of horses and marching soldiers. By the time Austrian forces reached full strength, Prussia had already seized the initiative. The war unfolded on multiple fronts simultaneously. In the south, Austrian forces achieved early successes against smaller Prussian detachments. These victories encouraged Vienna, but the decisive theater lay in the north. In Bohemia, where the main Austrian army faced the converging Prussian forces, everything would be settled there. General Ludwig von Benedek commanded the Austrian Northern Army. He was a capable officer with experience from campaigns in Italy, but Benedek had never fought in Bohemia. He did not know the terrain. He had requested command of the Southern Front, where he had served before. His request was denied. The Habsburg High Command insisted he take the northern position. This decision would prove costly. Prussian planning was more methodical. Chief of Staff Helmuth von Moltke coordinated the movements of 3 separate armies. Each army advanced along its own axis, but all were directed toward a single point of convergence. The goal was to surround and destroy the Austrian army in a decisive battle. This required precise timing and communication. Moltke used the telegraph network to maintain coordination across vast distances. Orders could be transmitted in hours rather than days. By early July, the 2 armies approached each other near the fortress town of Königgrätz. The Austrians occupied defensive positions along the Bistritz River. They had roughly 215,000 men. The Prussians numbered approximately 221,000 when all three armies united. The battle would be one of the largest in European history up to that point. Fighting began before dawn on July 3, 1866. Prussian artillery opened fire on Austrian positions along the river. Austrian guns returned fire. For several hours, neither side gained a clear advantage. The Austrian army held strong defensive ground. Benedek's troops fought with discipline and courage. By midday, it seemed possible that Austria might repel the attack. But the battle was not yet decided. Moltke had planned for this moment. While two Prussian armies engaged the Austrians from the front, a third army under Crown Prince Friedrich Wilhelm marched toward the Austrian flank. This army had traveled farther and arrived later, but its timing was perfect. In the early afternoon, Prussian forces struck the Austrian right wing. The Austrian army now faced attacks from two directions. Benedek attempted to reposition his forces to meet the new threat, but moving large formations under fire is difficult. The Austrian lines began to buckle. Then Prussian infantry assaulted the center of the Austrian position. Here the difference in weaponry became decisive. Prussian soldiers carried the Dreyse needle gun, a breech-loading rifle. This weapon could be fired 5 to 7 times per minute. More importantly, soldiers could reload while lying down or taking cover. They did not need to stand exposed. The mechanism was simple but revolutionary. A firing pin, driven by a spring, struck a primer embedded in the base of the paper cartridge. The soldier opened the breech, inserted the cartridge, closed the breech, and fired. The entire process took seconds and could be performed from any position. Austrian infantry still used muzzle-loading rifles. To reload, soldiers had to stand upright and pour powder and ball down the barrel. This took time and left them vulnerable. When Austrian troops attempted to advance, they met withering fire from Prussian positions. When they held their ground, they could not return fire at the same rate. The needle gun gave Prussia a significant tactical advantage. It changed the mathematics of combat. Austrian artillery performed well throughout the battle. In some sectors, Austrian gunners inflicted heavy casualties on advancing Prussian infantry. But artillery alone could not compensate for the disadvantage in infantry firepower. As the afternoon progressed, Austrian casualties mounted. Entire regiments were shattered by Prussian volleys. The army's cohesion began to disintegrate. By late afternoon, Benedek recognized the battle was lost. He ordered a retreat. The withdrawal was conducted with reasonable order at first. Austrian cavalry charged repeatedly to cover the infantry's escape. These charges were costly but effective. They bought time for the main body of the army to pull back toward Königgrätz and then beyond. Prussian forces pursued, but they too had suffered significant losses. The battle killed approximately 44,000 men. Austria bore the greater share of casualties, with roughly 24,000 killed or wounded and another 13,000 captured. Prussian losses were approximately 9,000. These numbers represented only one day of fighting, but the strategic consequences extended far beyond the battlefield. After Königgrätz, Austria had no realistic prospect of winning the war. The main army had been defeated. Reinforcements could be gathered, but they would take time to organize and train. Meanwhile, Prussian armies advanced deeper into Austrian territory. Vienna itself came under threat. The Habsburg government sought terms for peace. But Prussia was not the only power fighting Austria. Italy had entered the war as Prussia's ally. The Italian kingdom wanted to annex Venetia, an Austrian possession in northern Italy. Italian military performance was less successful. At the Battle of Custoza on June 24, 1866, Austrian forces defeated a larger Italian army. The Austrian commander was Archduke Albrecht, one of the empire's most skilled generals. His victory was complete. Italian forces retreated in disorder. At sea, Italy also suffered defeat. The Battle of Lissa on July 20th saw the Austrian navy defeat the Italian fleet despite being outnumbered. Austrian Admiral Wilhelm von Tegethoff used ramming tactics to sink several Italian warships. This victory gave Austria control of the Adriatic Sea. For a brief moment, it seemed Austria might salvage something from the war. But victories in Italy could not change the fundamental situation. Prussia had won the decisive campaign in Bohemia. Austria could defeat Italy 10 times and still face defeat from Prussia. The strategic center of gravity lay in the north. What happened in Italy was secondary. On July 22, 1866, a preliminary peace agreement was reached between Austria and Prussia. The armistice took effect 5 days later. Final terms were negotiated over the following weeks. The Treaty of Prague was signed on August 23rd. The war had lasted exactly 70 days. The terms of peace reflected Bismarck's strategic vision. Austria was required to dissolve the German Confederation. This organization had existed since 1815. Its end marked the formal conclusion of Austrian influence over German affairs. Prussia was free to organize the German states north of the Main River into a new confederation under Prussian leadership. Southern German states remained nominally independent, but their future alignment with Prussia was only a matter of time. Austria also ceded Venetia to Italy, though this transfer occurred indirectly through French mediation. Italy had lost its battles but gained its territorial objective. In strictly military terms, Italy's performance had been poor. In political terms, the war achieved exactly what Italy wanted. This outcome demonstrated that wars are not won by battles alone, but by the political results they produce. Prussia annexed several German states outright. The Kingdom of Hanover, the Electorate of Hesse, the Duchy of Nassau, and the Free City of Frankfurt ceased to exist as independent entities. They became Prussian provinces. This expansion added 4 million people and significant territory to Prussia. It also created a contiguous Prussian state from the Rhine to the borders of Russia. What Bismarck did not do was equally important. He did not demand crushing indemnities from Austria. He did not insist on occupying Vienna. He did not seek to humiliate the Habsburg monarchy. This restraint was deliberate. Bismarck understood that Prussia might need Austria as an ally in the future. A permanently weakened and resentful Austria would become a problem rather than a partner. The minister-president thought in terms of decades, not months. He saw the map of Europe as it might be, not merely as it was. King Wilhelm of Prussia and the Prussian military leadership wanted harsher terms. They wanted a victory parade through Vienna. They wanted to annex Austrian territory. They had won the war and believed they had earned the spoils. Bismarck resisted these demands. He threatened to resign if his counsel was ignored. The confrontation was intense. Wilhelm ultimately accepted Bismarck's judgment. The peace terms were moderate by the standards of 19th-century warfare. This moderation shaped European diplomacy for decades. Austria did not seek revenge. When Prussia went to war with France in 1870, Austria remained neutral. This neutrality allowed Prussia to concentrate all its forces against France and win decisively. The moderation of 1866 directly enabled the triumph of 1870. The speed of the war shocked Europe. Conflicts between major powers typically lasted months or years. The Austro-Prussian War was over in weeks. This brevity resulted from several factors. Railway networks allowed rapid mobilization and concentration of forces. The telegraph enabled centralized command and control. Modern rifles increased the lethality of combat, making decisive battles more likely. And both sides recognized when further fighting would not change the outcome. The war demonstrated the military value of industrial development. Prussia had invested in railways, telegraphs, and armaments. These investments produced victory. Other European powers took note. France began an ambitious program of railway construction in strategic regions. Russia accelerated its own industrial development. Britain examined its army organization with new urgency. In the years following 1866, every major nation expanded its rail network and modernized its military infrastructure. Arms manufacturers received increased government contracts. Telegraph lines were extended to every garrison and fortress. The lessons of the war were clear. Industrial capacity translated directly into military power. Nations that failed to modernize would face defeat. The Drey's needle gun became famous after Königgrätz. Its performance validated the principle of breech-loading firearms. Within a decade, every major European army adopted similar weapons. The era of the muzzle-loading rifle ended. Infantry tactics evolved to take advantage of increased firepower. The changes began in 1866, spread throughout military establishments across the continent. For Austria, the defeat marked a permanent shift in focus. The empire could no longer compete with Prussia in German affairs. Habsburg interests turned elsewhere. The Compromise of 1867 created the Austro-Hungarian dual monarchy. Hungary gained significant autonomy within the empire. This arrangement stabilized the Habsburg realm for the next half-century, but it also confirmed Austria's retreat from German politics. The war created the conditions for German unification. Without Austrian opposition, Prussia organized the North German Confederation in 1867. This confederation included all German states north of the main river. It had a federal constitution but was dominated by Prussia. Bismarck became the Confederation's chancellor. When war with France came in 1870, the southern German states joined Prussia. Victory over France completed the unification process. The German Empire was proclaimed in January 1871 at Versailles. None of this would have been possible without the outcome of 1866. The Austro-Prussian War removed the primary obstacle to Prussian leadership of Germany. It demonstrated Prussian military superiority. It established Bismarck's reputation as a master strategist. And it showed that swift, decisive wars were possible in the modern age. The war also established precedents for military planning. Moltke's use of separate armies converging on a single battlefield became a model for future operations. His reliance on railway networks for strategic mobility influenced every subsequent conflict. The Prussian General Staff system, with its emphasis on detailed planning and rapid adaptation, was copied by other nations. The professional military culture that produced victory in 1866 shaped European warfare for generations. Yet the speed and decisiveness of the war created false lessons as well. European military planners in the early 20th century studied 1866 and concluded that future wars would be short. They believed that modern firepower would produce quick decisions. They assumed that railway networks would allow rapid mobilization and concentration. They expected campaigns to last weeks, not years. When World War I began in 1914, these assumptions proved catastrophically wrong. The conditions that allowed a 7-week war in 1866 did not exist in 1914. but the memory of Prussian success influenced planning nonetheless. In 1866, the war achieved its political objectives quickly, because those objectives were limited. Prussia wanted to expel Austria from German affairs. Austria wanted to maintain its influence but was prepared to accept defeat when the cost of continuing became too high. Neither side sought the complete destruction of the other. Both governments could negotiate a peace that preserved their essential interests even in defeat. This kind of limited war became increasingly rare. As nationalism intensified and states mobilized their entire populations for conflict, wars became total. Victory meant complete defeat of the enemy. Compromise became impossible. The Franco-Prussian War of 1870 showed the beginning of this trend. The two world wars of the 20th century completed it. The Austro-Prussian War represented a transitional moment between the cabinet wars of earlier centuries and the total wars of the modern era. For 7 weeks in the summer of 1866, two empires fought for dominance in Central Europe. One emerged victorious and proceeded to reshape the continent. The other accepted defeat and redirected its ambitions elsewhere. The speed of the conflict surprised contemporaries. The consequences lasted for decades. What began as a dispute over two small duchies ended with the reconfiguration of Germany and the rise of a new great power. Railways carried the armies to battle. Telegraphs coordinated their movements. Rifles decided the outcome. These technologies, combined with careful planning and decisive execution, produced results that would have seemed impossible a generation earlier.